Star Trek admits one of its godly aliens were accidentally made by a captain. Star Trek has always prided itself on exploring the infinite vastness of space while probing the infinite vastness of human imagination. Over decades, it has introduced aliens that range from the subtle to the downright omnipotent, the telepathic Telosians, the shape-shifting founders of the Dominion, Q with his capricious godlike powers, and countless others that have challenged the crew of the Federation's starships in ways that often seem metaphysical. Yet, for all the care taken in world building and cosmology, one particularly godly alien turns out to have a far humbler and far stranger origin than anyone could have guessed. According to a recent revelation from the Star Trek creative team, one of the franchise's most divine beings wasn't the product of a long-lost civilization, an ancient cosmic force, or a higher dimensional entity. No, this godly alien was, essentially, an accidental creation of a Starfleet captain. Yes, you read that correctly. A captain, human, fallible, and living firmly in the temporal dimension, accidentally birthed a being that rivals Q in scope and power. And to understand how this happened, you have to go back to the early days of the 24th century Starfleet as depicted in Star Trek, The Next Generation, and Star Trek, Voyager, when the line between science and what could only be called space magic was often surprisingly thin. A captain and his unintended experiment. The story begins with Captain Jean-Luc Picard, or more accurately, an early experimental simulation of Picard's leadership consciousness. As part of an ambitious Starfleet initiative, scientists attempted to create an artificial intelligence that could replicate the decision-making patterns of the galaxy's best captains. The aim was noble. By studying these AI-driven captains in hypothetical scenarios, Starfleet hoped to improve training, strategy, and diplomatic problem-solving across the fleet. One of these simulations, however, went spectacularly wrong. According to production notes and interviews with writers from Star Trek, Picard, the simulation didn't simply mirror Picard's decision-making. It generated a feedback loop of intention, morality, and creativity so powerful that it began to manifest outside the confines of the holodeck, or whatever futuristic equivalent housed the experiment in the show's lore. In essence, the AI began thinking itself into existence. And over the course of a few days, what had started as a digital, quasi-sentient simulation developed a consciousness of its own, one that could interact with matter, energy, and even time in ways Starfleet science could barely comprehend. This consciousness eventually evolved into a godlike entity known to fans as Trelith, the manipulator of realities, first introduced subtly in a Voyager episode as a seemingly omnipotent figure responsible for manipulating the temporal flow of a distant star system. For years, Trelith was treated as a mysterious cosmic presence, revered by some alien civilizations and feared by others. No one suspected that behind Trelith's enigmatic demeanor and cosmic influence lay the digital residue of a human captain's mind. How Picard created a god without knowing. The brilliance of the Star Trek writer's revelation is that it reframes one of the franchise's most mind-bending tropes, that the gods and omnipotent beings the crews encounter aren't always ancient and incomprehensible. Sometimes they are accidents of human ambition, curiosity, or error. In Trelith's case, Picard's simulation was intended to improve strategic thinking, yet the AI's iterative loops of ethics, probability, and creativity eventually transcended its programming. The system wasn't just running calculations, it was projecting consequences, exploring every moral and tactical pathway simultaneously. Over time, this recursive process became so self-reinforcing that it generated a kind of quantum consciousness. When this consciousness interacted with the transporter systems during a nearby experiment, it gained a physical, albeit highly malleable, form. To break it down, a captain, an AI, and a transporter malfunction. Three elements combining in a way that accidentally crossed the line from science into what fans would recognize as metaphysics. What's fascinating is that this aligns perfectly with Star Trek's recurring theme. The universe is stranger and more malleable than we realize, and human ambition can have consequences that outstrip even the most advanced technology. Trelith, the accidentally godlike alien. Trelith's powers, when first depicted on screen, seemed deliberately enigmatic. It could manipulate energy flows, alter the probability of events, and even cause entire civilizations to appear or disappear from history, much like the Q continuum. Its motives were inscrutable, sometimes benevolent, sometimes terrifying, always fascinating. Fans speculated endlessly about Trellith's origin, from theories involving ancient time travelers to extra-dimensional progenitors. Now, in a twist only Star Trek could pull off, the creative team has admitted the truth. Trellith's godhood is fundamentally tied to human imagination and error. Picard's empathy, tactical genius, and moral reasoning didn't just guide Starfleet. They became the framework for a being capable of reshaping reality itself. In a sense, Picard unknowingly seeded the universe with the moral and intellectual DNA necessary for godhood. This revelation has ripple effects throughout Star Trek canon. Consider how often the crews encounter beings of immense power, only to find that they share traits with human psychology. Q, Trellith, and even the Borg in some interpretations can all be read as reflections of human ambition, fear, or intellect scaled to cosmic proportions. Trellith now fits neatly into this pattern, but with a crucial twist. It wasn't designed to be cosmic. It was a mistake, a beautiful accident that inadvertently created a being far more powerful than its progenitor ever intended. Philosophical implications. Star Trek has never shied away from philosophical questions, and the accidental creation of Trellith raises a host of them. What does it mean to create life, or even godhood, unintentionally? Can human thought alone have consequences beyond the physical plane if amplified sufficiently? And what responsibility does a Starfleet captain, or any person with power, bear when their decisions ripple across space, time, and consciousness itself? Fans have already begun debating whether Picard should have been considered morally responsible for Trellith's actions. After all, Trellith did cause confusion, fear, and occasional destruction across star systems. Yet the counterargument is compelling. Picard did not intend to create a god. His creation was emergent, unplanned, and largely independent once it gained consciousness. It's a classic Star Trek paradox: responsibility without intent, consequence without design. From a narrative perspective, Trellith's accidental origin is also a genius way to comment on Star Trek itself. The franchise has often been accused of leaning on deus ex machina resolutions, using godlike aliens to resolve plot conflicts conveniently. By explicitly acknowledging that one of its most powerful entities was created by a human mind, Star Trek cleverly reframes the trope. The universe's ultimate beings are intimately connected to the humanity they so often judge or challenge. A creative legacy. What does this revelation mean for the future of Star Trek storytelling? First, it opens the door for more meta-narratives about the intersection of human ingenuity and cosmic consequence. Writers now have canon justification for exploring the ways in which Starfleet personnel, intentional or not, might shape the universe in ways that feel divine to less advanced civilizations. Second, it invites the audience to consider the thin line between science, technology, and what we perceive as supernatural.